The rain in New Avalon doesn't just fall, it seeps into the soul, a fine, miserable drizzle that clings to everything, turning the gray cityscape into a watercolor painting left out in a storm. It was the kind of afternoon that made the fluorescent lights of the Docklight Mart feel both like a refuge and a cage. For me, after 8 hours sweating over a grill as a line cook, it was just the latter. The air, thick with the smell of stale coffee, cheap cleaning fluid, and damp wool, was suffocating. My name is Marin Reyes. I'm 24, and my life is a series of shifts, one job bleeding into the next, a frantic scramble to keep my head above the murky waters of this city's harbor. This second job, stacking shelves and wiping counters, was supposed to be the easy one, mindless, a way to shut off my brain and just count the hours until I could collapse into my lumpy mattress. Today it wasn't easy. Are you deaf, Reyes, or just stupid, mister? Henderson's voice cut through the low hum of the refrigerators. He was a man whose small authority had inflated his ego to grotesque proportions. His face, ruddy and perpetually damp with sweat, was thrust close to mine. He pointed a trembling, sausage-like finger at a milky puddle spreading on the cracked linoleum floor. That's coming out of your paycheck. Do you have any idea how much our dairy delivery costs? I also didn't spill it. A kid in a superhero raincoat had knocked the carton off the shelf not 10 minutes ago, his mother dragging him away with a hissed apology that Henderson had conveniently ignored. But arguing was pointless. In his world, the lowest person on the totem pole was the designated target for everything that went wrong. "I'm sorry, Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice barely a whisper. My throat felt tight, constricted by a familiar knot of powerless frustration. "I'll clean it up right away." My apology was a mistake. It was an admission of guilt I didn't bear, and it only fueled his tirade. "Sorry doesn't cut it. This is the third time this week you've been careless. I'm running a business here, not a charity for clumsy girls." He was shouting now. The handful of customers in the store had stopped their shuffling. Silence fell, broken only by the rain tapping against the glass and the angry buzz of Henderson's voice. I could feel their eyes on me, a sea of dull, curious stares, and then the modern-day pillory, the glint of phone screens, one, then two, then three, all raised to capture my humiliation. My face burned, a hot, creeping shame that started in my stomach and spread to the tips of my ears. I was a spectacle, a 2-minute diversion in their dreary, rain-soaked day. A man reeking of cheap whiskey and unwashed clothes shuffled closer. He had a leering grin that exposed yellowed teeth. "Give the girl a break. Henny," he slurred, his eyes roaming over me in a way that made my skin crawl. "A pretty thing like that. She can spill my milk any time." His laughter was a wet, guttural sound. He took another step, invading my personal space, and before I could react, his hand shot out, clamping around my wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong, his fingers digging into my skin. "Come on, sweetheart, let's see a smile." I flinched back, a purely instinctual movement, trying to pull my arm away. The sudden jerk was enough to knock my worn wallet from the pocket of my apron. It hit the floor with a soft thud, spilling its meager contents, a few crumpled bills, a library card, and a single dog-eared photograph. The picture slid across the dirty floor, stopping right in the milky puddle. It was my mother. Her smile, warm and genuine, beamed up from the filth. It was the only photograph I had of her. The only thing I had left, a wave of cold panic, sharper and more painful than the public shame, washed over me. That's when the bell above the door chimed. The sound was clean, crisp, and utterly out of place in the grimy store. A man stepped inside, shaking the rain from a fine, dark wool coat. He was tall, with the kind of severe, elegant posture that didn't belong in a place like Docklight Mart. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored dark suit, the kind that probably cost more than my rent for a year. A single, charcoal-colored pin glinted at his collar. Two other men, dressed in similar, though less expensive, attire, followed him in, flanking the entrance like statues. They didn't look like security. They looked like shadows given human form. The newcomer's presence shifted the very atmosphere of the room. He moved with an unnerving stillness, his dark eyes sweeping over the scene with a detached, analytical calm. He took in Henderson's spittle-flecked rage, the drunk's foul grin, the silent, recording crowd, and me, pinned in the center of it all. Henderson, too blinded by his own pathetic power trip, didn't seem to notice the change. "Look at this mess," he bellowed, shoving me back. My heel caught on the edge of a shelf, and I stumbled, my back hitting a display of canned beans with a jarring thud. Useless. The man's gaze dropped from my face to the floor. It settled on the photograph of my mother lying in the spilled milk. Without a word, he moved. His steps were silent, economical. He bent down in a fluid motion, his expensive suit be damned, and picked up the small, sodden square of paper. He held it carefully between his thumb and forefinger, and with a clean white handkerchief from his breast pocket, he gently blotted the moisture away. The drunk, emboldened by my lack of resistance, chose that moment to escalate. He let go of my wrist and snatched the plastic tray of coffee cups I was meant to be refilling. "Party time," he roared, shaking it wildly. Cups flew everywhere. I flinched, a cold dread icing my veins, but the stranger was already in motion. He walked to the checkout counter, his movements completely unhurried. He placed my mother's photo carefully on the clean part of the counter. Then he took out a black leather wallet, opened it, and began to remove bills. Not one or two. He emptied the entire contents of the register tray onto the counter. Hundreds, thousands, a mountain of cash that seemed to suck all the sound out of the room. The gesture was so bizarre, so absolute. It felt like he had literally stopped time. The drunk turned his foul attention to the stranger. "What are you looking at, pretty boy? You want some of this?" He spat a string of ugly words, each one a small, sharp blow. The stranger didn't even look at him. He simply shifted his body, placing himself between me and the drunk, shielding me from view. His voice, when he spoke, was low and quiet, yet it carried over the rain and the hum of the lights with absolute authority. "That's enough." It wasn't a request, it was a command. The air crackled. Henderson, finally realizing he'd lost control, puffed out his chest. "I'm calling security. You can't just come in here and—" The stranger reached into his suit jacket and placed a business card on the counter next to the pile of money. It was matte black, thick and heavy. There was no name, no number, just a single, stylized V embossed in the center. He then lifted his gaze, looking past Henderson directly into the small, domed security camera above the register. "I'll pay for the damages," he said, his voice still quiet, but now laced with something cold and hard as steel. "But you are humiliating my person." A collective intake of breath seemed to pass through the small crowd. The phones, as if on some silent command, were lowered. The man's eyes finally met mine. They were dark, intense, and unreadable. He held my gaze for a beat, and then he spoke the words that would change everything. "That's my woman." The sentence hung in the air, a shield forged from 4 simple words. It wasn't a declaration of love or passion. It wasn't possessive. It was a statement of fact, a line drawn in the sand. This person is under my protection. End of discussion. The spell of the crowd broke. People began to shuffle away, suddenly very interested in the contents of the chip aisle or the price of detergent. They moved around him as if he were a boulder in a stream, parting to let him pass. He shrugged off his coat and, with a grace that was almost gentle, draped it over my shoulders. The wool was heavy, warm, and smelled faintly of rain and something clean and masculine. He was careful not to let his fingers brush against my skin, a gesture of profound, almost formal respect that was more comforting than any touch. Just then, the store's security guard, a paunchy man named George who was at least 60, came ambling up the aisle. "What's all the commotion?" he asked, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. before George could even process the pile of cash or the stranger's imposing presence. One of the men from the door stepped forward. He held up a small device, and on its screen was a crystal-clear video of the drunk man grabbing my wrist and knocking over the cups. The angle was from the side. Perfect. A body camera. The gentleman in the stained jacket was the cause of the disturbance, the man said in a monotone. We have his actions documented. George blinked, his mind clearly struggling to catch up. I stood there, cocooned in the stranger's warm, heavy coat, my head spinning. I didn't know this man. I'd never seen him before in my life. We had no connection, no history. There was no reason on earth for him to step into my miserable life and erect this impenetrable fortress around me. Why? My gaze drifted from his face down to my arm. The drunk's grip had left angry red marks on my wrist, already beginning to blossom into an ugly purple bruise. The stranger's eyes followed mine. His dark gaze settled on the bruise. The air around him seemed to drop several degrees. The detached calm in his expression vanished, replaced by something else, something cold, focused, and utterly terrifying. A fuse had been lit, and in the sudden, echoing silence of the Docklight Mart, I had the distinct and chilling feeling that the entire city of New Avalon was about to feel the heat of the flame. The heavy silence of the Docklight Mart pressed in on me, thick and suffocating. Mr. Henderson's face was a pale, slack-jawed mask of terror, his eyes flicking between the mountain of cash on his counter and the man who had put it there, Cassian Vale. The name clicked, dredged up from the ambient noise of New Avalon, the Vale Consortium. They didn't just own property on the harbor, they were the harbor. My own pulse was a frantic bird beating against my ribs. Cassian Vale turned from the stunned security guard, his gaze sliding over Henderson as if he were a piece of furniture, and landed squarely on me. That cold, assessing focus was back. There is a rear exit, he said. His voice, still quiet, cut through the store's atmosphere like a diamond. It leads to the alley. My car is waiting. I was still wearing his coat. It was a shield, impossibly warm and heavy, but it was also a chain. I felt the eyes of his two men, the shadows by the door, watching my every move. He wanted to escort me out the back, like a package, like something he owned. That's my woman. The words echoed in my head, a mix of protection and possession. My pride, the only thing I truly had left, bristled. I shrugged the coat from my shoulders, ignoring the sudden shock of cold air on my skin. I held the heavy wool out to him. Thank you, I managed, my voice sounding rusty to my own ears. But I'm leaving through the front. I saw a flicker of something in his dark eyes, surprise, perhaps, or maybe just recalibration. He didn't argue. He simply took the coat, folding it neatly over his arm. As you wish. My photo, I said, my gaze darting to the counter. It was the only thing that mattered. He picked it up. The handkerchief had protected it, but the edges were still damp. My mother's smile was blurred, but it was still hers. He didn't just hand it back. He reached into his suit jacket and produced a card. This one was different from the black one he'd thrown at Henderson. It was stark white, made of heavy cardstock, with precise, black engraving. He carefully tucked my mother's photograph behind it and offered the whole thing to me. Rhea Quill, he said. She is chief counsel for the Vale Consortium. The implication was clear. If Henderson fires you, if the police cause trouble. I took the card and the photo, my fingers brushing his. His skin was warm, a stark contrast to the ice in my veins. I don't need a lawyer, I said, tucking the photo safely into my own pocket. Perhaps, he replied, his face unreadable, but you have one. He didn't move to stop me, and he simply stood, a pillar of quiet authority by the checkout, as I turned my back on him, on Henderson, on the puddle of milk and the shame. I pushed through the front door, the bell chiming a mocking farewell. The rain had turned mean. The earlier drizzle was now a cold, persistent downpour, driven by a wind that smelled of the harbor salt, diesel, and wet asphalt. I zipped my thin cook's jacket to my chin and started walking. My head down, the streetlights of New Avalon were just beginning to flicker on, their sickly yellow light reflecting in the oily puddles. I'd taken maybe 20 steps, the noise of the store fading behind me, when my phone vibrated in my jeans pocket, a cheap, buzzing sound against my thigh. I pulled it out. Unknown number. I flipped open the text. "Don't let anyone protect you. You know where your father's thing is." The blood didn't just run cold in my veins, it evaporated. I stopped dead on the sidewalk, the rain plastering my hair to my face. Father's thing. It was always the thing. A vague, shadowy inheritance of trouble I didn't understand. My father, Hector Reyes, had been a senior accountant for Arclight Urban Works. It sounded impressive. In reality, it was a solid gray job in a solid gray building, managing contracts for city construction. Then, 2 years ago, he'd fallen from a scaffolding on a secure site project at the Onyx Pier. A tragic accident, the papers said. The police report was closed in a day. But the insurance, the life insurance policy that was supposed to keep me and my mother afloat, it never paid out. Anomalies in the paperwork. The adjusters claimed, pending a full review. A review that had now lasted 732 days. A review that had forced me to drop out of community college and take 2 jobs. A review that had, I was sure, hastened my mother's decline. I stared at the screen, the rain blurring the words. I wasn't just cold anymore. I was terrified, and I felt watched. A prickling sensation on the back of my neck that had nothing to do with the weather. "Marin?" I gasped and spun around, my phone nearly slipping from my hand. Cassian Vale was standing 3 feet away. His 2 shadows hovered by a black sedan at the curb, the engine idling so quietly it was barely audible over the rain. He hadn't followed me. He'd anticipated my path. He didn't look at my face. He looked at the phone in my hand, at the way I was holding it, at the sheer panic that must have been radiating off me. His gaze lifted, scanning the street, the rooftops of the buildings across from us, the dark alleys between them. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask what was wrong. He asked a single, terrifyingly specific question. "Is someone following you?" The directness of it, the assumption of threat, cut through my panic. This was the world he lived in. This was his language. I don't know, I stammered. It was the truth. "I don't know," I repeated, clutching the phone so hard the case creaked. "It's just my father's work. It was complicated. He left things." He watched me, his expression unreadable in the deepening twilight. The rain dripped from the sharp line of his jaw. "Complications are my business." "I don't want this kind of business," I shot back, my fear making me rash. "You may not have a choice." His eyes softened, just fractionally. He saw the stubborn set of my jaw, the defensive posture. "You're getting wet." "I'm fine." "You told me you didn't know why I stepped in," he said, ignoring my protest. "I don't like bullies, and they were loud." He paused, and his gaze dropped for a fraction of a second to the angry red marks on my wrist, already beginning to darken. They left a mark. I pulled my sleeve down. "It's fine." I didn't know why I said the next part. Maybe it was because he'd saved my mother's photo. Maybe it was because he was the first person in 2 years who had looked at me with something other than pity or indifference. "My mother," I said, the words tasting like old pennies. "Before she died, she was confused, but she kept repeating one thing. If things get bad, Marin, find the old metal box. That's all. Just a box. I looked everywhere. I never found it." I'd offered him a piece of my broken puzzle. I expected him to ask questions: what was in it? Where did my father work? He did none of those things. He simply nodded, absorbing the information as if I'd just commented on the rain. He accepted the fragment of truth without prying for more. He reached into his suit jacket again, but this time he didn't pull out a card. He retrieved a slim, dark phone, the kind with no logos. He tapped the screen and held it out to me. "My personal number," he said. "Not my office, not my counsel. Mine." I stared at it. at the string of digits glowing on the screen. Why? "Rhea Quill is for legal problems," he said. "She is for Mr. Henderson. She is for the system." He looked up, his eyes meeting mine, and the intensity in them pinned me to the spot. "That number," he gestured to his phone, "is for when the system fails." He put the phone away. "If they raise their voice to you again, Marin, use mine. I will be louder." Without another word, he turned and walked back to the sedan. A door was opened for him, and he slid inside. The car pulled away from the curb as silently as a shark gliding through water, its red taillights disappearing into the new Avalon gloom. He left me standing there, soaked to the bone, with the smell of rain and asphalt, and a phone number that felt heavier than a brick in my pocket. My apartment in Harborline Flats was a 40-minute walk. My legs felt like lead, but I took the long way. Over the Cinderspan Bridge. It was an old iron skeleton, stretching over the black, churning mouth of the river as it met the harbor. The wind was fierce up here, shrieking through the rusted trusses, whipping my wet hair across my face. It felt exposed, dangerous. Halfway across, I felt it again, that same prickling sensation on my neck. I glanced over my shoulder. A dark SUV, its headlights off, was cruising slowly behind me. The bridge was empty, just me and the vehicle. My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't just following, it was pacing me. I started to walk faster. The SUV sped up, matching my stride. It was toying with me. I was a mouse, and it was a very large, very patient cat. Then, just as it drew almost parallel, the engine roared, a deep-throated sound that echoed off the metal. It rocketed past me, tires spraying up a fan of dirty water that soaked my legs. It took the first exit at the end of the bridge and vanished. I didn't just walk the rest of the way, I ran. Harborline Flats is a tenement building that perpetually smells like boiled cabbage and damp plaster. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely find the lock. I stumbled into my third-floor room, kicked the door shut, and threw the deadbolt. I leaned against the door, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps, listening to my own pulse roaring in my ears. Safe. I was safe. Then I looked down. A plain manila envelope had been slid under the door while I was at work. My stomach dropped to the floor. I nudged it with my toe, then slowly, reluctantly bent down and picked it up. It wasn't sealed. Inside was a photograph, 4x6, glossy. It was me. I was at the Docklight Mart, wiping down the coffee counter, my back to the camera. It had been taken from outside, through the rain-streaked window. It was from today, before the spill, before Henderson, before Cassian. They had been watching me all along. I turned the photo over, scrawled in thick red marker, the ink bleeding slightly into the paper, was a message. "Be good, Marin, or the harbor will swallow you." I sank onto my lumpy mattress, the photo trembling in my hand. This was real. The text, the SUV. Now this, they weren't just watching, they were tightening the net. I felt utterly, terrifyingly alone. I pulled my phone out, my fingers, numb and clumsy, typed in the number Cassian Vale had given me. I pressed the call button. It rang once, twice. A click. Yes. His voice. Not hello, not Vale, just yes, as if he were waiting, expectant, powerful. I opened my mouth, and nothing came out. What could I possibly say a man I don't know just saved me from public humiliation, and now other men I don't know are threatening me about a box I don't have? I sounded insane. I was a line cook, drowning in debt, and I had just dialed the number of one of the most powerful men in the city. My pride, that stubborn, foolish Reyes core, surged up, choking the fear. I would not be a damsel. I would not trade one kind of threat for another kind of protection. I would not be his woman. I jabbed the end button, cutting the connection. I sat in the dark, the red-inked threat burning in my mind. The old metal box. My mother's words. I had looked everywhere in her old apartment. Nothing. Wait. When she died, I'd moved her things here. What little was left. A trunk of clothes, a few books. and an old, beat-up metal letterbox, the kind for mail. It was decorative, ugly, rusted at the hinges. I kept it under my bed, full of old pay stubs. I pulled it out. It was empty, just as I remembered. I ran my fingers along the bottom, the sides. Nothing. I stopped. I thought back. I hadn't looked everywhere. My room was small, the floor cheap laminate that warped in the damp, except for one corner, by the window, a small patch of original hardwood, maybe 3 feet square, that the landlord had been too cheap to cover. One of the boards had always been loose. I'd tripped on it a dozen times. I crawled over, my heart suddenly loud in the silence. I dug my fingernails into the gap between the boards and pulled. The wood resisted, then came up with a low groan, releasing the smell of dust and old timber. There was a small, dark void beneath, and inside it, resting on the grimy subfloor, was another metal box, my mother's old letter box, the one from her childhood home. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely lift it. It was light. I fumbled with the rusted clasp. It wasn't full of ledgers or cash. There were only 2 items inside. The first was a single, heavy brass key attached to a faded yellow plastic tag. The tag was brittle, but the words, stamped in black, were clear. Gray Pier Vaults, Unit 713. The second was a postcard, a cheap, faded picture of the New Avalon skyline, back when the Arclight towers were just steel frames. On the back, in my mother's familiar, elegant script, was a message. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It just said, "Come after the first rain." I looked out the window. The rain was hammering against the glass now, a deluge, the first real storm of the season. It wasn't a warning from my mother. It was a map, a set of instructions left by the dead. The harbor wasn't going to swallow me. I was going to find out exactly what secrets my father had hidden inside it. Sleep didn't come. I spent the night in my rattling armchair, the brass key heavy in my palm, the postcard on my lap. Come after the first rain. The storm had passed, leaving New Avalon washed clean, the air smelling of ozone and the sea, but I felt dirtier than ever. The key and the photo of me at the shop were sitting side by side on my table, a map from my dead parents and a threat from the men who likely killed my father. My exhaustion was a heavy, buzzing thing in my skull when the knock came. It wasn't a neighbor's knock. It was hard, flat, and official. 3 raps, bam, bam, bam. I froze. I crept to the door, my stockinged feet silent on the warped laminate. I looked through the peephole. 2 men. They were a New Avalon cliché, cheap dark suits that didn't fit their shoulders, damp from the morning fog, faces like bored hammers. I opened the door, but only as far as the flimsy security chain would allow. "Can I help you?" Marin Reyes, the taller one, asked. His voice was flat. "Yes." He flashed a badge in a worn leather wallet. It was gold, but it looked tinny. "Bureau of Metropolitan Integrity. We have some questions about your father's employment at Arclight Urban Works. Hector Reyes." My blood turned to slush. Bureau of Metropolitan Integrity, BMI. I'd lived in New Avalon my whole life and never heard of them. "Your badge," I said, stalling, my voice higher than I wanted. "Can I see it again through the peephole?" The man's eye, visible through the distorted glass, narrowed. "Ma'am, we'd prefer to do this inside." "I'm not dressed." "A lie. This won't take long. It's just routine." He was pushing, his tone friendly, but his shoulder was already pressing against the door, testing the chain. This wasn't official. This was them. The ones from the SUV. The ones who sent the photo. I need to put my shoes on," I stammered. "My manager is expecting me." I backed away from the door, my heart a trapped bird, my hand shaking, found my phone on the table. My pride was a distant, hollow echo. The memory of the red ink on the photo was sharp and immediate. I pulled up the contact from last night, Cassian Vale. My fingers flew. "One word, help!" I stared at it. It was pathetic. It was weak. It was exactly what he wanted. I added an emoji, a single blue, a raindrop, A reference to the postcard, a sign that this wasn't a false alarm. I hit send. "Miss Reyes," the man's voice at the door was no longer friendly. "Open the door. We have a warrant." "Slide it under," I yelled back, my voice trembling. "That's not how this works." I heard a scrape. A credit card. A tool. He was trying to slip the chain. A different sound, a metallic scrape, coming from the other side of the room. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. The rusted, rattling fire escape window, the one I kept triple locked, was sliding open. A woman in a perfectly tailored, razor-sharp gray suit stepped inside, silent as smoke. She was followed a second later by a younger woman with short, electric blue hair and a laptop bag slung over her shoulder. They moved with a predatory grace that was utterly terrifying. The woman in the suit was the one from the business card, Rhea Quill. "Gentleman at the door," Rhea said, her voice like chilled steel. The fumbling outside my apartment door stopped instantly. "You are in violation of Federal Code 18, Section 912, impersonating an officer of the United States. You are also," she continued, her voice rising to project through the wood, "in violation of 3 separate municipal trespassing codes. Your attempt to gain entry is unauthorized." The blue-haired woman, Nikita, didn't say a word. She just held up a thin tablet, its screen facing the door. "And I have high-definition audio and video of this entire interaction," she chimed in, her voice bright and cheerful. "It's already uploading to a secure server. We're running your faces against the real BMI database right now. Should be interesting." A beat of absolute silence. Then, footsteps, not walking, running, scurrying down the hallway until the sound vanished down the stairwell. I was leaning against the peeling wallpaper, my legs threatening to give out. Rhea Quill didn't look at me. She walked calmly to my front door, checked the hallway, and then deadbolted it. She tested the broken chain and sighed. "We'll need to fix that." Nikita, meanwhile, was already at my fire escape window, her fingers flying over a small device she'd plugged into. Something. They jimmied the lock. Sloppy, but they got in. Amateur, I'll secure it. My phone buzzed in my hand, a video call, Cassian Vale. I stared at the screen, then jabbed accept. His face filled the small screen. He was in a dim office, the light from a single desk lamp carving sharp shadows under his cheekbones. He looked like he hadn't slept either. His dark hair was slightly mussed. He didn't ask, "Are you okay?" He didn't ask, "What happened?" He looked past me, scanning the sliver of my apartment visible behind me. Is the door locked? The adrenaline, the lack of sleep, the sheer terror of the last 5 minutes, it all boiled over into anger. "Your team just locked it," I snapped. "Did you send them before I texted? Were you watching my apartment?" He didn't acknowledge the question. "They weren't real agents, Marin." "I figured that out when they tried to break down my door. I don't need this," I hissed, gesturing wildly. "I don't want to be your woman. I don't need to be owned." A long pause stretched between us, humming with digital static. His expression didn't change, but his eyes were so intense it felt like he was in the room with me. "Protection isn't possession, Marin," he said, his voice low and firm. "It's a resource. You needed it. You used it." He paused. "The transaction is complete for now." Rhea Quill cleared her throat, stepping into my line of sight. "Marin Reyes, I'm Rhea Quill. This," she gestured to the blue-haired woman, "is Nikita Sloan, our technical specialist." Nikita gave me a jaunty 2-finger wave, her eyes never leaving her laptop screen. "Bad guys are gone. Your Wi-Fi is a dumpster fire, by the way. Cashin asked me to look into Arclight Urban Works after your encounter at the Mart," Rhea said, all business. "Arclight is a front. We've suspected for months that they are the primary money laundering operation for the Onyx Harbor outfit." My blood, which had been boiling, turned back to ice. Onyx, the name of the pier where my father had his accident. "Your father," Rhea continued, her voice softening just a fraction, "was their senior accountant. We don't think he was just in on it. We think he was trapped. The insurance claim being blocked, that's Onyx pulling strings. making sure his death looked just complicated enough to keep anyone from digging. His accident was almost certainly a silencing. My hands were shaking. I held up the brass key. Gray Pier Vaults, Unit 713. Rhea and Nikita exchanged a look. This time, Nikita looked up from her screen. "Whoa," Nikita said. "That's deep in their territory. That's Jasper Cade's personal playground." "And," Rhea said, her eyes fixed on the key, "it's the most likely location of what we've been hunting for 6 months. Hector Reyes' manual ledger, the physical proof, the one thing that could burn them, an arc light, to the ground." The puzzle pieces slammed together. The thing from the text message, the metal box my mother remembered, the key, the threat. "I'm going," I said. It wasn't a question. "Marin, you can't be serious," Rhea started. "That place is a fortress. We need a plan. We need surveillance." "It's my father's key," I said, my voice shaking but resolute. "It's my life they're threatening. I'm going." My phone buzzed. Cassian, still on the video call. "You're not going alone," and he said, "I'm not letting you send your thugs," I retorted. "I'm not," he said. "Rhea, you stay clean. Coordinate from the outside. Handle the legal fallout if this goes sideways." Cash and Rhea began to protest. "You," he said, and his eyes locked on me. "Me and Nikita. We are going. Nikita handles the tech. I'll handle the physical component." He paused. "But you, Marin, you have the key. You have the name. You lead. You are in command." I stared at the screen. Not an order. Not possession. A strategy. A partnership. I took a deep breath. "Okay, when—" Nikita snapped her laptop shut. "Now," she said, a grin touching her lips for the first time. "Their security is weakest during the mid-morning shift change. And besides, I'm already bored." 10 minutes later, I was in the passenger seat of a battered, nondescript blue panel van that smelled faintly of metal and ozone. Nikita was driving, humming a tune I didn't recognize. Cassian was in the back, a silent shadow among a few locked cases. He had changed out of his suit into dark jeans and a simple black Henley that showed the defined muscles in his forearms. He was no longer the CEO. He was the man from the shadows. "Okay, role play," Nikita said as she navigated the damp harbor roads. We get to the gate. Guard stops us. "What's your story, Marin?" I'm here to see my vault." "Bzzzt, wrong." Nikita swerved to avoid a pothole. "You're Harbor Line couriers. You're holding this clipboard." She tossed a worn clipboard into my lap. "You're dropping off estate paperwork for processing at the main office. You're annoyed. You're stressed. You're looking at your watch. People ignore annoyed people with clipboards. Got it." "Got it." "And the cameras?" I asked, my voice small. "Gray Pier is an antique," Nikita said, tapping her console. "Their system runs on a closed loop. I'm not hacking it, I'm just feeding it. Once we're inside the main vault hall, I'll patch in. They'll be watching a lovely 90-second clip of an empty corridor. As long as we're not in there longer than 90 seconds at a time, we're ghosts." The plan worked. The guard, a beefy man in a stained uniform, barely looked up from his paper as I shoved the clipboard at him. He just waved us through. The vault itself was a cavernous, refrigerated warehouse, smelling of cold concrete, rust, and the faint, salty tang of the sea. Rows and rows of identical metal doors. "Back left," Nikita whispered, her voice in the tiny earpiece Cassian had given me, "near the fire exit." Cassian moved ahead of me, his steps silent. He wasn't looking at the doors. He was watching the corners, the ceiling, the angles. We found it, 713. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely fit the key in the lock. Cassian put his hand over mine, not to help, but just to steady me. His touch was warm, firm, a solid point in a spinning world. "You're in command, Marin," he whispered. I took a breath and turned the key. The lock clicked, loud in the silence. The heavy metal door swung open with a low groan. It wasn't a vault full of gold. It was a tiny, cramped office, a single desk, a chair, and on the desk, a metal safe deposit box. It wasn't even locked. Inside a thick, leather-bound notebook, a simple silver USB stick, and one more folded piece of paper, in my father's precise, angular handwriting. I opened the note. It was short. "Don't trust anyone in a white shirt at the docks." "We have it," I whispered, holding up the book and the drive. "Let's go." "Good," Cassian said, stepping back into the corridor to watch our exit. "Let's—" Clang, clang, clang! The sound was so loud it hurt my teeth, a deafening, old-fashioned alarm bell. Red lights began to strobe, sweeping the corridor, painting everything in blood. "Nikita the Loop," Cassian barked into his collar mic. "That wasn't me." Nikita's voice was frantic in my ear. "It's a physical tripwire on the door. They knew someone would open that specific unit. Get out." Heavy footsteps, shouting. From the main entrance we'd come through, a group of men appeared, hard-looking, dressed in dockworker gear, carrying more than just box cutters. They were blocking our only exit. A man stepped out from the front of the group. He was huge, with a shaved head that gleamed in the red alarm lights and a brutal, sneering face. He clapped his hands together, a slow, mocking sound that echoed the bell. "Well, well, well, Cassian Vale. Nice of you to slum it." He boomed. His eyes, small and dark, swiveled and landed right on me. He held out a massive, scarred hand. "And looky here, Hector's little girl, all grown up." The sneer widened. "You found it. Smart. Now be smarter. Give it back." This had to be Jasper Cade. "That girl," he roared, pointing a thick finger at me, "has our property." The red alarm light strobed, turning the vast, cold warehouse into a pulsating crimson nightmare. The clang, clang, clang of the bell was a physical blow, vibrating in my teeth, in my chest. Jasper Cade's voice, full of arrogant triumph, echoed in the cavernous space. "Give it back, little girl." My blood froze. This was it. This was the moment my father must have seen coming, the reason he'd hidden the key, the reason my mother had been so terrified. We were trapped between Cade's crew at the main entrance and a solid concrete wall. But Cassian Vale didn't freeze. Before I could even process a coherent thought, his hand clamped around my upper arm. It wasn't gentle. It was steel. He didn't pull me back. He yanked me sideways, spinning me behind a tall, teetering pallet of shrink-wrapped boxes. I stumbled, clutching the leather-bound ledger to my chest as if it were a shield. "Nikita, where is the back door?" Cassian's voice was a low command in my earpiece, perfectly calm amid the din. "North wall, Sector 4, a green roll-up." Her voice came back, tinny and frantic. "It's mag-locked. I'm working on it." Cade's men were fanning out, their heavy boots scraping on the concrete. They were moving to flank us. Cassian crouched low beside me, pulling a small, polished steel inspection mirror from his pocket. He angled it around the edge of the pallet. I could see the reflection of his eye, hard and assessing. "7 of them," he murmured. "Cade and 6. They're armed, but holding back. They want the book, not a firefight." "What do we do?" I whispered, my voice sounding impossibly small. "We create a new door." He pressed his hand to his ear, tapping his comms. "Silas, May, containment, north wall, Sector 4. We're coming to you. Non-lethal priority. We have a civilian." Civilian. That's what I was. A civilian who had just walked into a war. "The maglock is fried," Nikita's voice crackled. "But the motor drive? I've got the motor drive. It'll be slow." "Just open it," Cassian ordered. From the far end of the hall, I heard a low, metallic groan. A slice of darkness appeared under the green roll-up door. It was opening, but only just, maybe 6 inches off the floor. "Not fast enough," Cassian said. He looked at me, his face illuminated by the pulsing red light. "We need a diversion." He was looking past me. My eyes followed his gaze, on the concrete pillar just behind us. Mounted in a red metal bracket was a fire extinguisher, a big one. My father's ledger, my mother's warning, my life hanging by a thread. I wasn't a civilian. I was Hector Reyes's daughter. I didn't wait for permission. I scrambled up, grabbed the heavy cylinder, and yanked it from the wall. Cade's men shouted, seeing the movement. There she is. I pulled the pin. Cassian was already moving, stepping in front of me, but I was faster. I aimed the nozzle at the open corridor and squeezed the handle. A deafening "hee-see" erupted, drowning out the bell. A massive, choking cloud of white chemical powder blasted into the aisle. It hit the men like a solid wall. They disappeared instantly, their shouts turning to coughs and curses. The white mist, caught in the flashing red lights, looked like a blizzard from hell. Go now. Cassian grabbed my arm again, this time pulling me forward into the fog I'd created. We ran, hunched low. The powder was thick, stinging my eyes, clogging my throat. I tasted chemicals and fear. You worthless! Jasper Cade's voice roared, cutting through the chaos. He was somewhere to our left, his massive form a shadow in the white haze. He was furious. You think you're smart, just like your father, a rat in a box. That's all he was, and that's all you are. His words hit me harder than a fist. He was slandering my father. He was slandering me. The same suffocating public shame from the Docklight Mart welled up in my throat, but this time it was mixed with pure, hot rage. I stopped. I turned toward the voice. Cassian saw it. He spun, putting his body between me and the unseen threat. He shoved me flat against the wall, shielding me. And then he did the last thing I expected. He stepped out. He walked calmly out of the white fog, his hands empty at his sides. He stood in the middle of the corridor, illuminated by the flashing red alarm and the steady, sick green of the emergency exit sign. He looked like a statue. Cade, he said. His voice wasn't a shout. It was a cold, flat blade that sliced through the alarm, the coughing and the hissing. The Onyx crew, wiping the powder from their faces, froze. Cade, his face a mask of white dust and rage, stared at him. Right here, Cassian said, his voice dropping low. No one speaks to my person that way. It was the second time. The second time he had stood in front of me and drawn a line in the sand. Not my woman, my person. It was colder, more absolute. It was a statement of fact, not emotion. She is mine to protect. A beat of stunned silence. Then one of Cade's men, a wiry man with a long knife, decided he was brave. He lunged at Cassian from the side, aiming for his ribs. It wasn't a fight. It was removal. Cassian pivoted on his heel, intercepting the man's arm. His movement was a blur of black cloth and brutal efficiency. There was a sharp, clean sound, not of a break, but of a joint locking in a way it was never meant to. A classical, devastatingly simple shoulder lock. The man cried out, a short, sharp sound, and went down, the knife skittering across the concrete. Cassian didn't even look at him. He kept his eyes locked on Jasper Cade. We don't want a war, Jasper, Cassian said, but you can't have the book, and you can't have her. Cade stared, his small eyes calculating. He had 6 men. Cassian was one, but that one had just dismantled his best man in 2 seconds without breaking a sweat, all while being covered in fire extinguisher dust. Suddenly, a new sound, a loud electronic crackle. The alarm bell stopped. A woman's voice, amplified, boomed through the warehouse PA system. It was Rhea Quill. Attention, Jasper Cade. This is Counsel Quill of the Vale Consortium. You are in violation of... The legal jargon was thick, but the message was clear. Bureau of Metropolitan Integrity units have been dispatched. They are 2 minutes out. All your exits are compromised. It was a psychological bomb. Cade's face went from rage to something else. Panic. BMI was real. They were the feds who could shut his whole operation down. He looked from Cassian to me, and then to the main exit. He didn't know it was a bluff. He couldn't afford to find out. This ain't over, Vale, he snarled, spitting a wad of white foam. He jabbed a thick finger at his men. Get the van. Get out. Go, go, go. He didn't run. He retreated, his eyes promising murder, but he was leaving. The Onyx crew scrambled after him, disappearing back toward the main entrance. Nikita, the door, Cassian yelled. It's open 12 inches, go. Cassian sprinted, pulling me with him. We reached the north wall. The heavy green door was open just enough. He slid under it like a snake. I clutched the ledger and dove after him, scraping my stomach on the dirty concrete. I tumbled out into an alleyway and a deluge. The storm had returned, a brutal, driving rain that hit us like a physical force. It stung my skin and plastered my hair to my face in an instant, washing away the white powder. Standing by the exit were the two shadows from the Docklight Mart, a tall, imposing man with the deadest eyes I'd ever seen, Silas, and a woman, May, who was coiled like a spring. They weren't fighting. They were simply there, a human wall. They saw Cassian, nodded once, and melted back toward a dark, unmarked SUV idling at the mouth of the alley. "Go!" Cassian yelled, his voice barely audible over the roar of the rain. We piled into the back. May was in the driver's seat. Before my door was even closed, the SUV shot backward, fishtailed in a spray of water, and rocketed onto Meridian Avenue, blending into the chaotic midday traffic. I was breathing in huge, ragged gulps. My body was shaking, a delayed reaction to the adrenaline. I was soaked, I was cold, I was alive, and I had the book. "They'll be watching the bridges," Cassian said to May. "Take the lower transit line. Stay off the main roads." "Got it," she said, her eyes on the mirrors. The SUV's interior was silent, save for the rhythmic thwack-thwack of the windshield wipers. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving behind the same raw, scraped-open feeling. I was shaking, and I was furious. "You have to stop doing that," I said, my voice hoarse. Cassian turned to me. He was watching the cars behind us, his body still tense, but his attention was on me. Doing what? "That, my person, my woman, that thing you do." My voice was rising. "I'm not a piece of property. I'm not a stray you picked up at the mart. I'm not yours." He held my gaze for a long time. The tension in the car was thick enough to cut. I expected him to be angry, to dismiss me. He did neither. "I use those words to lock their mouths. Marin," he said, his voice quiet but intense. "I say them to shut them down." He leaned in, just a fraction, "not to lock you." His answer disarmed me. It wasn't about ownership. It was a strategy. It was a shield. The same way he'd stepped in front of me in the vault. I didn't have a reply. I just stared at him, my breath catching in my throat. I looked down at the prize in my lap, the leather-bound ledger. It was soaked from the rain. I opened it carefully. My father's handwriting, neat, precise, angular. It was all codes, but one line, repeated on several pages, caught my eye. A note in the margin. Lily Blue = LB = long blue shipping. Underneath it were columns of numbers, dates and times that were all in the middle of the night, 2 a.m., 3:15 a.m. "It's not just a ledger," I whispered, tracing the letters. "It's a shipping manifest." He was tracking ships for a company called Long Blue Shipping. Cassian had stopped watching the road. He was looking at my hands. My fingers were white-knuckled around the cover of the book, on my left wrist, stark against my pale, cold skin, was the dark, ugly bruise from the drunk at the Docklight Mart, a map of my humiliation. He reached out. His movement was slow, deliberate. He didn't touch the book. He didn't touch my hand. He gently brushed his thumb over the dark, discolored skin of the bruise. His touch was surprisingly warm. It wasn't a caress. It wasn't romantic. It was an acknowledgement, a question. He met my eyes, and his gaze asked what his voice didn't. "Are you damaged?" I thought of the man in the store, of Henderson, of Jasper Cade, of the men who had killed my father. I thought of the terror, the rage, the suffocating powerlessness. I should have pulled away. I should have flinched. I didn't. I just looked back at him, the rain hammering on the roof of the SUV, and gave a single, short nod. It was the first time I'd ever felt in the presence of this dangerous, silent man. Something other than fear, I realized with a jolt, trust. The SUV didn't take me back to Harborline Flats. The idea was so absurd it was almost laughable. Instead, we ascended. We drove up through the rain-slicked streets, leaving the grit and grime of the harbor district below, climbing into the clouds that shrouded the glass and steel towers of New Avalon's financial district. The van pulled into a subterranean garage, a place of polished concrete and silent. Expensive cars, an elevator, accessed by Cassian's thumbprint, shot us upward in unnerving silence. The doors opened directly into his penthouse. My cheap, damp clothes felt like a sacrilege in this space. It wasn't opulent, it was vast, minimalist, and severe. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides offered a god's-eye view of the city, a sprawling map of lights blurred by the relentless rain. The furniture was sparse, elegant, and looked profoundly uncomfortable. It wasn't a home, it was a fortress, a watchtower. Nikita didn't seem to notice. She was already at a long, black marble island that served as a kitchen counter, pulling out her laptop. "Okay, let's see what Daddy Reyes left us," she chirped, plugging the silver USB stick into her machine. I placed the wet ledger on a towel Cassian had laid out. Rhea was on a large screen on the wall, her face as crisp and professional as if she were in the room. "The book is an analog backup." Rhea's voice filled the room. "The drive will have the real meat." For 10 minutes, the only sound was the clicking of Nikita's keys and the rain lashing against the windows. Then, she whistled. A low, impressed sound. "Okay, wow. Your dad was good. Marin, this is beautiful." "Translate, Nikita," Cassian said. He was standing by the window, a dark silhouette against the stormy cityscape. "He built a ghost ledger," she said, her fingers flying. "Every invoice from Long Blue Shipping is a fabrication. The cargo manifests are real. The ships exist, but the payments listed here, they're phantom transactions. They're a cover for money moving out of Arclight, and the destination is always the same." She pointed to the screen, a name I'd never heard before. The Civic Resurge Fund. "A public-private partnership for urban renewal," Rhea explained from the monitor, her face grim. "A classic shell. They take dirty money from Arclight, wash it through civic improvement projects, and funnel it to their partners. And their partner is the New Avalon Port Development Committee," Nikita added, bringing up a complex flowchart of names and arrows, which, surprise, surprise, has 3 board members who also sit on the board of Arclight and whose chief of security is a consultant on loan from the Onyx Harbor outfit. It was a closed loop of corruption, a snake eating its own tail, with my father trapped right in the middle. "There's something else," I said, my voice hoarse. I'd been flipping through the damp pages of the ledger. "Here, and here." I pointed to a notation in the margin, next to 2 of the largest phantom transactions, Vicar 27. "Vicar," Rhea mused from the screen. "That's not a shipping term. That's an acronym." She was silent for a moment. "It could be a unit designation, Vigilant Interstate Cooperative Against Racketeering. It's a semi-mythical federal task force. Very quiet, very clean. If they're involved." "And they're not feds," Cassian said, turning from the window. His voice was flat, certain. "A real task force wouldn't be in bed with Arclight. Vicar is something else. A third player, a competitor." He walked toward me, his eyes on the ledger. "Jasper Cade is a blunt instrument. Onyx runs the docks with their fists. This," he gestured to Nikita's screen, "is elegant, sophisticated. Cade isn't the architect of this. He's just the guard dog." He stopped in front of me. "I need to be clear with you. Marin, I am not the good guy in this story. My business and Cade's are in opposition, but we operate in the same ecosystem. I have a code. I do not involve civilians. I do not tolerate the kind of sloppiness that gets bystanders hurt." He looked pointedly at the bruise on my wrist. "Cade and his partners broke that rule when they put their hands on you. When they killed your father, they turned a civilian into a target, and that I do not allow." The honesty was more jarring than any lie would have been. He wasn't a knight. He was a king, and Jasper Cade had trespassed in his kingdom. "He was trapped," I whispered. the story tumbling out of me. My mother, she had a heart condition. The medical bills they were impossible. I think Arclight used that. They squeezed him. He was a good man, a careful man. He wouldn't have done this unless he had no other choice. This ledger, and this was his way out. For me, he was leaving me a weapon. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken things. Nikita had stopped typing. Rhea was watching me from the screen. Her professional mask softened with something like sympathy. Cassian just nodded. Then we will teach you how to use it. He turned and walked into the kitchen area. I heard the click of a gas stovetop, the clatter of a pot. A few moments later, the clean, sharp scent of ginger filled the air, and he was making soup. The gesture was so profoundly normal, so domestic, it was utterly surreal. The crime lord, the king of the harbor, was quietly making soup for me in his multi-million-dollar penthouse. The simple act did more to shatter his intimidating aura than anything else had. He brought over 2 steaming mugs. The soup was clear, fragrant, and intensely hot. The warmth spread through my chest, a welcome antidote to the bone-deep chill that had settled in me since the vault. "Thank you," I said, my voice small. We stood over the island, the ledger open between us. My father's coded world laid bare under the soft kitchen lights. I pointed to a sequence of numbers. "This looks like a routing number, but 1 digit is off." Cassian leaned in to look, his arm brushing mine. At the same moment, my hand moved to steady the page, and my fingers landed on top of his. The contact was electric, a jolt, sharp and unexpected. I froze. I could feel the warmth of his skin, the slight roughness of a callus on his thumb. My breath hitched. I was suddenly intensely aware of him, not as a protector or a crime boss, but as a man. The scent of rain and clean laundry from his clothes, the quiet sound of his breathing. The world narrowed to that single point of contact. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, wild rhythm that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with a dizzying, terrifying pull. Cassian's phone buzzed on the counter, a harsh, violent sound that shattered the moment. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. He picked up the phone, his expression instantly hardening, the brief warmth vanishing. "Yes." He listened, his body going rigid. "Where? How many?" And the message. He turned, and the look in his eyes made my stomach clench. It was cold fury. "That was Silas," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "One of my men at the docks, a watchman. He's been taken. Onyx just sent a message to my port manager." He didn't have to tell me the rest. I already knew. "They want to trade," he said. "Your life for his. Pier 9, midnight." My mug slipped from my fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The hot soup splashed across my ankles, but I barely felt it. Pier 9, just a few hundred yards from where my father fell. "We are not making that trade," Cassian stated, his voice absolute. He was already talking into his comms. "Silas, get the vehicle ready. May, full tactical, Nikita. I want eyes on every camera within a mile of Pier 9. He turned to me. "Here's the plan. Nikita will create a duplicate of the ledger's cover. May will deliver it to a dead drop. That will draw their attention. You and I will go in the opposite direction. I have a safe house in the old quarter. You will stay there until this is over." It was a good plan, a logical plan, a plan that treated me like a package, a piece of cargo to be moved from one secure location to another. "No," I said. He stopped, turning to look at me, a flicker of impatience in his eyes. "Marin, this is not a discussion." "Yes, it is," I said, my voice shaking but firm. I took a step toward him, my wet socks squelching on the floor. "They took your man to get to me. They're using my father's memory to threaten me. I am not going to hide in a safe house while your people fight my battle." I jabbed a finger at my own chest. "I am not bait, I am not a diversion, and I am not a prize to be traded." "This is not a game," he countered, his voice rising for the first time, a low, rumbling thunder. "This is Jasper Cade. He will not hesitate to put a bullet in you to make a point." Then I guess I'd better not give him the chance, I shot back. You think you're protecting me by hiding me. You're just postponing the inevitable. They will find me. They will always be looking for me as long as they think I'm just a scared girl who's in over her head. That is what you are. The words hung in the air between us, raw and brutal. No, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. That's who I was. In the Docklight Mart, in that vault, but not anymore. He stared at me, his jaw tight, a war of frustration and something else playing out in his eyes. The argument wasn't working. He saw the stubborn, unyielding set of my jaw, the Reyes pride. He took a deep breath, the anger visibly receding, replaced by that unnerving, analytical calm. He changed tactics. You're right, he said, quietly, stunning me into silence. Hiding you is a temporary solution. He stepped closer. If you are going to be in the field, you need to be an asset, not a liability. Show me your hand. Confused, I held out my hand. He took my wrist, his grip firm but not painful. They grab you like this, no, he said, his voice turning clinical, instructional. The pressure point is the thumb. Don't pull away, that's what they expect. You push in, hard, aim for the joint. He guided my other hand, showing me the motion. Break the grip, then strike. Eyes, throat, knee, whatever is available. Your goal is not to win the fight, it is to create a window to escape. He let me go and stood back. Your strongest weapon is your voice, not for screaming, for commanding. Say no. No, I said weakly. No, he repeated, his voice a solid wall of sound. Like you mean it. Like it's the only word in the universe. Say it from your diaphragm. Put all your anger, all your fear into that one word. Try again. I took a deep breath. I thought of Henderson's sneering face, the drunk's foul breath, Jasper Cade's mocking voice. I thought of the red ink on the photograph. No, I said, the word was louder, harder. It felt good. Again. No. It was a shield, a weapon. The word he had used to define my protection. He was now giving to me as my own. He nodded, a flicker of approval in his eyes. He had seen the shift. He had given me a tool, and I had taken it. Okay, I said, my heart still pounding, but with a new kind of energy. I'll go with you to Pier 9. I will be the one they see. I looked him straight in the eye, my voice steady, but we do this on my terms. He raised an eyebrow, waiting. This is my fight, too. I'm not just a key or a face. I'm a partner. From now on, every decision we make regarding my involvement, I have veto power. If a plan puts me in a position I'm not willing to accept, I can kill it. No questions asked. I held my breath. I had just laid down the law to Cassian Vale. He didn't hesitate. He didn't argue. A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. It wasn't mocking. It was warm. It was respect. Agreed, he said. Commander? The 2 hours before midnight stretched into an eternity. We spent them in the vast, silent penthouse, a war room floating in the sky. Nikita worked furiously, turning the blank duplicate ledger into a convincing prop, while Ria's disembodied voice directed a team of shadows across the city. Cassian and I barely spoke. We moved around the marble island, a silent, tense orbit. My father's real ledger, a sun we both revolved around. He had given me a change of clothes, simple black cargo pants and a soft, dark gray sweater. They fit surprisingly well. They felt like armor. The storm, which had been a steady downpour, escalated with a savage intensity. The wind howled against the windows, a mournful, angry sound. Rain came in horizontal sheets, turning the city lights into a blurry, impressionistic mess. Silas has the decoy, Ria's voice announced from the wall screen. He's en route to the dead drop location. May is in position with long-range optics. We're ready. Time to go, Cassian said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the storm's noise. We rode the elevator down in the same unnerving silence, but this time, it felt different. It wasn't the silence of strangers. It was the charged silence of two people who had seen the bottom and were about to leap. The elevator doors opened into the subterranean garage. A black armored sedan, indistinguishable from a dozen others, sat waiting, its engine a low, powerful hum. The air was cool and smelled of concrete and gasoline. And then, with a low groan of stressed metal from somewhere deep within the building, the world went black. The emergency lights in the elevator shaft died. The hum of the sedan's engine cut out. The only lights left were the faint, eerie red glows of exit signs at the far end of the garage. We were plunged into a profound, echoing darkness. Power grid failure. Nikita's voice crackled in our earpieces, tinny with static. The whole downtown core is out. The storm must have hit a primary substation. Backup generators will kick in, but it'll take a minute. A minute felt like a lifetime. The only sound was the storm, a muffled, drumming roar from somewhere above. It sounded like the city was drowning. It felt like the world had ended, and we were the only two people left in its concrete tomb. I shivered. It wasn't just the cold seeping from the concrete floor. It was the sudden, absolute vulnerability. All the technology, the power, the money, and now all of it was gone. And we were just two people in the dark. The adrenaline from our argument, the focus of the mission, it all drained away, leaving a hollow space filled with a deep, trembling nervousness. I felt, more than saw, Cassian move, a soft rustle of fabric. He stepped in front of me, a darker shadow in the gloom. He was holding something, a coat, not the heavy wool one from the Docklight Mart, but one made of something softer, like velvet or moleskin. He didn't speak, he just held it out, and when I didn't take it, he gently draped it over my shoulders. He was careful, his movements precise in the dark. His fingers brushed the fabric, but not my skin. He settled the weight of it on me, and then took a half step back, giving me space, leaving the next move entirely up to me. The coat was incredibly soft and warm, smelling faintly of him, that same clean, masculine scent, now mixed with the smell of the storm. The warmth was a comfort, a small island in the cold, echoing dark, but it was the space he gave me that mattered more. He wasn't crowding me. He wasn't assuming. He was waiting. My heart was a slow, heavy drum in my chest. I could hear my own breathing, see the faint puff of it in the cold air. This man had shielded me, armed me, and respected me. He had listened when I drew my line in the sand, and now, in the dark, he was offering warmth without demand. I took a half step forward, closing the distance he had so deliberately created. I could just make out the sharp lines of his face in the faint red glow from the exit sign. His eyes were fixed on mine. They weren't cold or analytical. They were dark, deep, and full of a question he would never speak aloud. The silence stretched, thick and alive. It was filled with everything we hadn't said, the terror in the store, the rage in the vault, the startling jolt of our hands touching over the ledger. This was the culmination of it all, a choice, to be made in the dark. I was the one who broke the silence. My voice was a whisper, barely more than a breath, but in the echoing quiet of the garage, it sounded like a shout. I want this. It wasn't a surrender. It was a declaration, my own command. He moved then, his hands coming up to cup my face. His palms were warm against my cold cheeks, his thumbs tracing the line of my jaw with an almost reverent gentleness. He leaned in, and the first touch of his lips to mine was impossibly soft. It was a question, a reassurance. It tasted of the ginger soup and the storm. The kiss started slow, a deep, unhurried exploration. It wasn't about passion, not yet. It was about anchoring. It was a promise made in the dark that we were not alone. His hand slid from my face, down my neck, and came to rest on my upper back, a firm, steadying pressure. He held me, but he didn't confine me. His other hand stayed on my jaw, tilting my head slightly. Our breath mingled, warm in the cold air, our soft sighs lost in the relentless drumming of the rain on the metal roof far above. A wave of warmth spread through my chest, chasing away the last of the chill, the last of the fear. The knot of terror that had lived in my stomach for 2 years began to dissolve. For the first time since my father died, I felt completely, utterly safe. And with that safety came a surge of something else: confidence, strength, trust. My hands, which had been at my sides, came up. I didn't cling to him. I wrapped my arms around his neck, my fingers tangling in the soft hair at his nape. I pressed myself closer, changing the angle of the kiss, deepening it. I was no longer just receiving his comfort. I was answering it. I was an equal participant in this. My heart, which had been fluttering with uncertainty, settled into a strong, steady beat. He responded to the shift instantly. A low sound rumbled in his chest, and his arm tightened around my back, pulling me flush against him. The kiss changed. It was still gentle, but now it was laced with a desperate, hungry heat that had been lurking beneath the surface. He pulled back, just enough for our lips to part, his forehead resting against mine. We were breathing the same air, our hearts beating in a frantic, syncopated rhythm. "You're safe here," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. I looked into his eyes, inches from my own. "Don't promise me things you can't keep, Cassian." "I only promise what I can guarantee," he breathed, and the conviction in those words was more intimate than the kiss itself. Just then, a loud clang echoed through the garage as the backup generators kicked in. A set of harsh, white fluorescent lights flickered on, flooding the space with sterile light and shattering our fragile bubble. Simultaneously, a soft chime came from the sedan's dashboard, a notification. The car was ready, the mission was waiting. We didn't spring apart. He slowly lowered his hands, and I reluctantly unwound my arms from his neck. We just stood there for a moment, our foreheads still touching, a silent acknowledgement that something profound and irrevocable had just passed between us. It was a connection that went deeper than skin. I pulled back and looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd walked into my life, I felt a real, genuine smile spread across my face. It felt foreign, but wonderful. "Let's go, boss," I said, my voice light. A ghost of a smile touched his own lips, reaching his eyes and making them glow with a warmth I'd never seen before. "By your command," he replied softly, "Commander." We carried that warmth with us like a shield. It was a silent, shared secret that wrapped around us as we walked to the car. We didn't touch, but I was more aware of him than ever before. "Aw, are the lovebirds done?" Nikita's voice, crackling with static and sarcasm, suddenly burst from our earpieces. "Because some of us are on a clock here, and Cade isn't going to wait all night for you two to finish your heart-to-heart." Cassian's jaw tightened, but I just shook my head, the smile still lingering. Ria's voice followed, a sharp, disapproving cough. "Everyone, check your comms. Nikita, maintain professionalism. We are entering the operational phase." The spell was broken. We were back. Cassian opened the passenger door for me. I slid into the leather seat, placing my father's ledger carefully on my lap. It felt different now. Not just a weapon, but a legacy. Cassian got in behind the wheel, his large frame filling the driver's seat. He started the engine, the low hum filling the silence. He was my partner. He was my commander. And I was his. We were a team. He put the car in gear and drove out of the garage into the rain-lashed, waiting darkness of New Avalon. The drive to Pier 9 was a descent into the city's underbelly. The storm's power outage had turned the lower districts into a lightless maze, a concrete canyon lit only by our headlights and the constant angry flicker of lightning overhead. The armored sedan, which had felt so powerful in the garage, now seemed like a small, fragile shell against the elemental rage of the storm. The warmth from our moment in the garage was a tiny coal of heat in my chest, a private armor against the ice water fear that was starting to creep back in. Cassian drove with an unnerving, focused calm. He didn't speak. He just navigated the flooded streets, the tires sending up huge plumes of black water. Pier 9, my father's place of death. It wasn't just dark. It was a black hole that seemed to drink the light. The long, narrow pier jutted out into the harbor, a skeleton of rotting wood and rusted steel. The only illumination came from a single, sputtering sodium floodlight at the far end, casting a sickly, orange-yellow glow that made the driving rain look like sulfur. The wind howled, a high-pitched metallic shriek, and the rain hammered against the corrugated tin roofs of the warehouses, a relentless, deafening drumbeat. Cassian killed the engine. The sudden silence was filled by the roar of the storm. "Comms check," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Eyes are up." Nikita's voice crackled in my earpiece. "I've got 2 clear thermals on the warehouse roof, but Cade's got a jammer running. It's patchy. Be careful." "May and Silas are in position," Ria's voice added, calm and steady. "They have the decoy and are awaiting your signal. Leo is confirmed, bound to a pylon at the end of the pier." "Leo, the watchman, the man they'd taken." Cassian turned to me. The faint glow from the dashboard lit the planes of his face. "This is your call. Commander, we can still pull the plug. We hit them. Hard, and extract Leo. You stay in the car." I looked out at the pier, at the place where my father's life had ended. I thought of the man in the white shirt, the whisper in the dark. Marrowlight Library? No, that was for later. This was for now. "No," I said, my voice steady. "We agreed. I have to be seen." I clutched the plastic-wrapped ledger to my chest. "Let's go." We stepped out of the car. The wind hit me like a physical blow, ripping the breath from my lungs and plastering my clothes to my skin. Cassian moved in front of me, his body a shield against the worst of the gale, and we walked. We walked into the pool of sick orange light. Jasper Cade was waiting. He'd set a stage. He was center. Under the floodlight, a giant of a man draped in a glistening yellow rain slicker. Behind him, I could see Leo, the captive watchman. He was slumped in a chair, his face bruised, his head hanging. Cade had a dozen men, all hard-faced dock workers from the Onyx outfit, fanned out in a semicircle, and in the front row, a man with a heavy, broadcast-style video camera, its red recording light glowing brightly. Cade's insurance, his trophy video. "Cassian Vale," Cade boomed, his voice barely carrying over the storm. He clapped his massive, gloved hands. "Welcome to my pier, glad you can make it. Let's make this simple. The price for your man." He jabbed a thick finger at Leo. "Is the girl, and the book she's holding. Hand him over, and we can all go home dry." Cassian tensed beside me. I felt him preparing to speak, to negotiate, to take control. But I remembered our agreement, my veto, my command. I put a hand on his arm, a silent stop, and I stepped past him. I walked out into the center of the pier, into the full glare of the floodlight and the unblinking red eye of the camera. The wind tore at my hair, whipping it across my face. I could feel Cade's surprise, his men's confusion. I wasn't cowering, I wasn't hiding. "Jasper Cade," I shouted, my voice raw, stolen by the wind but sharp with a fury I hadn't known I possessed. Cade's mocking smile faltered. "I am Marin Reyes," I yelled, projecting my voice just as Cassian had taught me. "Daughter of Hector Reyes." I saw Cade flinch at my father's name. "I am not a piece of property," I continued, looking past Cade, straight into the camera lens. I was talking to everyone, to the city, to the shadows. I belong to no one, and I am not here to be traded. I pointed at the slumped figure of Leo. "I am here to collect our man." The pier was silent. Save for the storm, I had seized the narrative. I wasn't the victim, I wasn't the bait. I was the one making demands. Cade sputtered, thrown off balance. You little..." "The trade." I cut him off, my voice like ice. "Let Leo go. Now." Cade stared at me, his face turning a dark, mottled red under the orange light. He looked at Cassian, who stood silent and still as a statue, letting me lead. Cade was being humiliated by a 24-year-old girl on his own pier, on his own camera. He made a sharp, angry gesture. Two of his men moved, cut Leo's ropes, and shoved him forward. Leo collapsed onto the wet planks, groaning. "May, extract," Cassian said quietly into his mic. From the shadows near the car, a figure moved with liquid speed. "May." She crossed the open ground, scooped Leo up in a fireman's carry as if he weighed nothing, and was gone before Cade's men could even react. "Now the book," Cade snarled, recovering, his hand moving to the heavy object on his hip. "Now we leave," I countered, standing my ground. "We walk back to our car. You and your men stay here and count the raindrops. When we're clear, my associates will deliver the copy of the ledger to a place of your choosing." Cade's face contorted. "A copy? You think you're in a position to—" He was interrupted. A tiny, hot red dot appeared on his chest. He froze. He looked down at the laser sight, his eyes wide with disbelief. Then the dot moved, zipping off him, and danced across the pier, landing on the thick wooden pylon right next to Cassian's head. A warning. "Rhea!" "What is that?" Cassian's voice was a whip crack, his body tensing. Sniper Rhea's voice was frantic in my ear. "Hi, warehouse roof, northeast, it's not Onyx I'm getting encrypted signals. Oh, God, Cassian, it's Vicar. 27 is on site. They're not here to talk. They're here to clean house. They're taking out both of you." My father's words, Vicar 27. The training in the penthouse. The lessons from Cassian, break the grip, create a window. I didn't think. I reacted. The dot steadied, aiming. I grabbed the front of Cassian's coat, the one I was wearing, with both hands and yanked backward with every ounce of my strength. Down. Wine crack! A sound like a giant bullwhip split the air. An explosion of splinters erupted from the pylon, exactly where Cassian's head had been a millisecond before. The force of the impact sent a shockwave through the wood, and I fell backward onto the slick planks, pulling Cassian down on top of me. He saved me at the docklight. I just saved him on Pier 9. "Nikita, lights now. Give me everything," Cassian roared, rolling off me, his weapon drawn in a single, fluid motion. "You got it, boss." The world turned white. Every floodlight, every lamp, every high-mast light on the entire pier complex exploded to life at once, turning night into a harsh, sterile day. And we saw them. They weren't just on the roof. They were on the gantries, the shipping containers, and advancing from the far end of the pier, at least 20 of them, dressed in black, state-of-the-art tactical gear, and under their unzipped vests, every single one of them was wearing a clean, stark white button-down shirt. Don't trust anyone in a white shirt at the docks. My father's warning, they were real. "What the hell is this?" "Vale?" Cade screamed, his men drawing their own weapons, spinning in confusion. "Who are these guys?" "Vale team, defensive perimeter, collapse to me," Cassian commanded, ignoring Cade. "Shield the civilians, non-lethal priority. We are exiting east." The Vicar team opened fire. It wasn't gunfire. It was a series of soft thwip-thwip sounds. Small canisters arced through the air, landing among Cade's men, hissing, gas. Cassian's team moved. May and Silas, his bodyguard, not the traitor from the future, were suddenly beside us, pressing respirators into our hands. They moved like shadows, forming a moving shield around me and Cassian, their movements economical and brutal, disarming Cade's men who were now choking, panicked, and caught between two forces. "The ledger," Cassian yelled at me over the chaos. "We can't let Cade get it, and we cannot let them get it." "Rhea, the drone now," I shouted, pulling the ledger from my coat. "Above you." A black, streamlined drone, built for speed, zipped down from the storm clouds. A small, watertight capsule descended on a high tensile wire. I shoved the ledger inside, slammed the lid, and hit the side of the capsule. Got it. The drone shot upward, the wire retracting, and vanished into the rain. Jasper Cade saw it. He saw his prize, the key to his entire operation, disappearing into the sky. He snapped, All his tactical awareness, his bluster, his control, it all evaporated, leaving only pure animal rage. "No," he roared. He raised his heavy revolver. He didn't aim at us. He didn't aim at the vicar team. He aimed at a stack of 55-gallon drums stacked against the warehouse wall, marked with red flammable liquid placards. Cassian saw it. "Cade, no, those are—" Cade fired. The world ceased to exist. It wasn't a sound. It was a physical blow, a concussive whump that hit my chest like a sledgehammer, driving all the air from my lungs and stopping my heart. A wall of pure heat and white light lifted me off my feet. The entire pier heaved, the massive wooden planks buckling like cardboard. I landed hard, my head striking the deck. I was deaf, my vision swimming. All I could see was fire. A sheet of flame was roaring across the pier, consuming everything. I felt a hand grab my jacket. Cassian, he was dragging me, his face a mask of primal determination, his mouth moving, but I couldn't hear him. The pier was collapsing, falling into the black, churning water. A chasm of fire and burning debris opened up between us and the only way out. Cassian didn't stop. He grabbed a thickly coiled mooring cable from a pylon, a rope as thick as my arm. He hurled the end over the gap, then looped it around his own body, pulling me tight against him. "Hold on!" I read his lips more than heard him. He kicked off, swinging us out over the inferno. For a second, we were suspended in the air, the heat scorching my face, the screams of men lost in the roar of the fire. We landed hard on the other side, rolling over the splintered wood. The vicar team was everywhere, rappelling from the roofs, their white shirts stark against the black smoke. One of them landed directly in our path. He was masked, anonymous. He raised his weapon. I flinched, but he didn't fire. He looked from Cassian to me. He grabbed my arm, his grip like a vice. I tried to strike him, just as Cassian had taught me, but he was too strong. He leaned in, his voice a filtered, mechanical whisper that bored directly into my ear, cutting through the ringing. "They lied to your father," he hissed, his voice urgent. "They lied to us. Cade was a pawn. Go to the Marrowlight Library. Find Hector's real will." He shoved me, hard, toward a dark channel of water running under the pier. Then he turned, aimed his gas launcher at his own advancing team, and fired, creating a thick, billowing wall of smoke to cover our escape. "Cassian, this way!" I screamed, my voice a raw croak. We didn't hesitate, we jumped. We plunged into the black, cold water, landing in a low-profile inflatable boat hidden in the shadows. Nikita was at the motor. "About time," she yelled, her face pale but grinning. "Hold on!" She slammed the throttle, and the small boat shot out from under the burning, collapsing pier, a rat escaping a burning trap. We sped out into the open harbor, the cold rain a blessing on my singed face. I looked back. Pier 9 was a funeral pyre, a column of black smoke and orange flame reaching for the sky. Sirens wailed in the distance. I was shaking, soaked to the bone and deaf in one ear. But I was alive, and I had the clue. I turned to Cassian, his face illuminated by the distant fire, his expression unreadable. "Marrowlight Library," I said, my voice hoarse, tasting of smoke and salt. "We have to go to the Marrowlight Library." The inflatable boat cut through the black, choppy waters of the harbor, a ghost fleeing a bonfire. Nikita, her face stark and pale in the glow of the GPS, navigated us through a maze of dark, silent canals I never knew existed, the city's hidden veins. We abandoned the boat in a flooded, forgotten slipway under the Meridian Avenue overpass. Clambering up a rusted ladder onto the street, another nondescript vehicle, this one a plumber's van, was waiting. Silas at the wheel. Not the bodyguard Silas, a different one. Cassian's network was a web of shadows and redundancies. No one spoke on the ride. The ringing in my ears had subsided to a low hum. My body ached from the explosion's impact, and the cold had seeped deep into my bones. The only warmth was the memory of a kiss in the dark, a silent promise that felt a lifetime away. The Merrowlight Library wasn't in a nice part of town. It stood on a forgotten corner in the old warehouse district, a place of crumbling brick and broken windows. It was an anomaly of architecture, a small, Gothic stone building that had clearly once been a chapel. Its steeple was a dark spike against the storm-racked sky. Its stained glass windows boarded over from the inside, leaving only faint, ghostly colors visible through the cracks. It looked less like a library and more like a tomb. The heavy oak doors were unlocked. The air inside was thick and cold, smelling of decaying paper, damp stone, and the ghost of a million extinguished candles. It was utterly silent. A cavernous main hall rose up to a vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. The walls were lined with towering, dark wood shelves, crammed with books that looked like they hadn't been touched in a century. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light from my phone. "Nikita, find the main archives, the card catalog, Rhea." Cashin's voice was a low command in the oppressive silence. "Cross-reference any donations or acquisitions from the last 50 years connected to the name Reyes or Arclight." We moved through the aisles, our footsteps echoing like gunshots. My eyes were drawn to the walls above the shelves, faded. Black and white photographs in simple frames hung in the gloom. They were portraits of old, stern-faced men and women, the library's benefactors, I presumed. And then I saw him. It was my father, when he was younger, his face less careworn, a real smile on his lips. My breath caught in my throat. He wasn't alone. He had his arm around a woman. She was beautiful, with sharp, intelligent eyes and dark hair cut in a severe, stylish bob. She was looking directly at the camera, a confident, almost challenging expression on her face. I had never seen her before in my life. "Cassian," I whispered. He came to my side, his gaze following mine to the photograph. He said nothing, but I felt a subtle shift in his posture, a new level of focus. "Rhea, I'm sending you a photo," he said quietly, snapping a picture with his phone. "I want to know who this woman is." "I found it," Nikita called from a dusty alcove. We followed her voice to a long, forgotten room filled with endless wooden drawers, the card catalog. It was an analog search engine, a relic from another time. Rhea's voice came through our earpieces, crisp and clear. "I have nothing under Reyes or Arclight in the official donor logs," she said. "But Nikita, look under classification. Check the architectural and engineering section. Specifically, look for the catalog number VICAR 27. Nikita's fingers, nimble and sure, flew through the cards. She pulled out a single, yellowed index card. "Got it," she said. "It's not a book. It's an archival deposit, a private collection. The card just says Vicar 27, the Hector Reyes Memorial Depository, access by original key only." My heart stopped. It wasn't an agency. It wasn't a task force. Vicar 27 wasn't a who. It was a what. It was a panic room my father had built for his secrets, hidden in plain sight. Original key. I breathed, my hand going to my pocket. I pulled out the heavy brass key from Gray Pier vaults. "The basement," Cassian said, his eyes already scanning the floor. "It would have to be in the foundations." We found it behind a section of loose shelving in the library's cavernous, damp basement. A single stone in the old chapel wall was a different color, a slightly different texture. I pushed, and it swung inward, revealing a small, dark cavity. Inside was a heavy, steel lockbox with a keyhole that perfectly matched the brass key in my hand. I slid the key in. It turned with a satisfying, heavy clunk. Inside was not what I expected. There was a small, black mini DV tape, a thick, bound document stamped with the Arclight logo and the words Project Onyx Supplemental Contract, and on top of it all, a single, folded letter, my father's handwriting. My hands were trembling as I opened it. "My dearest Marin, if you are reading this, then the worst has happened, and I have failed to protect you in life. I hope I have done better in death. The world you have entered is a dark one, full of men who will demand your loyalty, your silence, your soul, They will offer you protection in exchange for a piece of yourself. Do not make that trade. Remember this, my daughter. The most important choice you will ever make is not what you stand for, but who you stand with. Choose the one who stands with you. Marin, not the one who demands you stand by them. The first is a partner. The second is a master. I love you. Be brave. Dad. Tears blurred my vision. I looked up at Cassian, who was watching me, his expression unreadable. The one who stands with you. He had shielded me. He had armed me. He had given me command. The tape, he said gently, nodding to the small black cassette. Nikita was prepared. She pulled a small, portable DV player from her bag. We huddled together in the damp, musty basement, the only light coming from the tiny, flickering LCD screen. The footage was grainy. Shot at night, it showed a construction site, the Onyx Pier. A group of men in arc-light hard hats were deliberately loosening bolts on a section of scaffolding. Then, the camera panned to a document they were holding up, a list of names, a payroll sheet, hazard pay night crew. It read, the men my father had been forced to pay off. The next scene was horrifying. It showed the scaffolding collapsing. It showed bodies. It was a faked accident. It was mass murder, orchestrated by Arclight to silence a crew of workers who knew too much. At the end of the tape, the camera focused on another document, a list of accomplices, subcontractors who provided faulty materials, city inspectors who signed off on the site, and at the bottom, a list of names under the heading External Security and Logistics. My eyes scanned the list. Onyx Harbor outfit, long blue shipping. And one more, one that made the air leave my lungs in a painful rush. Silas, Vale Consortium. The name was a punch to the gut. Silas, Cassian's bodyguard, the tall, silent man with the dead eyes who had been a constant presence. The man who had driven us from the library. The traitor wasn't just in his organization, he was in his inner circle. He was in our car. He was with May and Leo right now. I looked up at Cassian. His face was a mask of stone, but I saw it in his eyes, a flicker of profound, soul-deep pain, the kind of pain that comes from the deepest betrayal. He'd been looking at the screen over my shoulder. He had seen it too. He was silent for a full 10 seconds. The only sound was the drip of water from the stone ceiling. I expected him to deny it, to rage, to question the tape's authenticity. He did none of those things. He looked at me, his eyes dark with a hurt that mirrored my own. Thank you for showing me, he said. His voice was quiet, devoid of emotion but heavy with the weight of the new reality. He trusted the evidence. He trusted me. He's with May and Leo, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He knows where your safe house is. Nikita, Cassian's voice was suddenly steel. Cut all comms to Silas's unit, now. Isolate him. Done, she replied instantly. He could be a double agent, I said, my mind racing. He could be Vicar. We need to know what he knows. My own words from the penthouse came back to me. My veto, my command, and Cassian, my decision. We take him alive, we make him talk. Cassian nodded, his eyes hard as flint. Agreed. How? I asked. He'll be expecting us. We won't go to him, Nikita said, a wicked grin spreading across her face. We'll make him come to us. The trap was simple and brutal. Nikita reactivated a single isolated channel to Silas's comms. She then sent a pre-recorded audio file, using May's voice, pitched to sound panicked. Silas, we're compromised Leo's coding. My vehicle is disabled. I need immediate evac at the old cannery. Pier 4. I'm pinned down. It was a perfect lure. A call for help from a teammate in distress. He wouldn't be able to resist. We waited in the cavernous, silent cannery, a derelict building that smelled of rust and dead fish. It was just me and Cassian. Silas arrived less than 10 minutes later. He came in fast and quiet, a shadow moving through the rain. He was alone. He entered the main processing floor, his weapon raised, scanning the dark corners. May report, he called out, his voice echoing in the vast space. Cassian stepped out from behind a rusted-out conveyor belt. He was holding not a weapon, but a set of heavy-duty zip-tie cuffs. Silas froze. He saw Cassian, and in that split second his face showed it all: shock, guilt, and the cold resignation of a man who knew he'd been caught. He didn't raise his weapon to fire. He knew it was useless. "You always said to secure the asset before engaging the threat." "Silas," Cassian said, his voice dangerously calm, "you taught me that rule." He moved. It was the same blur of speed and efficiency I'd seen in the vault, but this was different. It was personal. He disarmed Silas with a single, brutal twist of the wrist, sending the gun clattering across the floor. He spun the larger man around, kicked the back of his knees to force him down, and had the cuffs secured before Silas could even grunt in protest. No blood, no fight, just the cold, clean application of his own code. "Why?" Cassian asked, his voice a low growl of pain. Silas knelt on the floor, his head bowed. "It wasn't about the money," he said, his voice raspy. "Not at first." He looked up, his dead eyes full of a strange, twisted conviction. "You think Vicar is a government agency? It's not. It's an alliance, a vigilant interstate cooperative, formed by Arclight, Onyx, and other players. They saw the corruption in the city, the weakness. They decided to become the new authority. They wanted to cleanse the harbor. Your father, Marin, he got in their way. He wouldn't play ball, so they crushed him." "And you," Cassian demanded, "you believed in this." "I believed in order," Silas spat. "Your code is sentimental. Cassian, you let too many variables exist. Vicar was clean, absolute." "They're murderers?" I said, stepping out of the shadows. Silas just stared at me. "They're practical." He let out a harsh, broken laugh. "And you're all too late anyway. This is bigger than a book. It's bigger than a tape. It's all digital now." "What are you talking about?" Cassian asked, hauling him to his feet. "Tomorrow night," Silas said, a triumphant sneer on his face. "The long blue Kestrel leaves port. It's not carrying cargo. It's carrying the ledger machine, the master server. Every transaction, every bribe, every ghost contract from the last 5 years. Once that ship is in international waters, the server is wiped remotely. Vicar vanishes. Arclight is clean. Onyx is just a bunch of thugs again. You have the history book. Marin. They are about to burn the whole library." The ticking clock, the final piece. "We have to stop that ship," I said. "They'll be expecting a direct assault," Cassian said, his mind already working. "They'll have the server under heavy guard." An idea sparked in my mind, a crazy, desperate idea born from my father's cleverness and Nikita's tech. "No," I said, thinking aloud, "we don't steal the server. We swap it." Cassian and Silas both looked at me. "Nikita," I said into my comms, "can you build a convincing replica of a server as shell?" "In my sleep," she replied. "Then that's what we do," I said, my voice gaining strength. "We build a bait server, and inside it, instead of hard drives, we pack it with a device, a legal ink bomb. When they move the server, we trigger it. It's not a weapon, it's a marker. It deploys a cloud of indelible, DNA-tagged, bright blue dye, a non-lethal charge that paints everyone and everything within 10 feet. It marks the evidence, and it marks the people holding it, right before the press and the real authorities arrive." Silence. Cassian stared at me, a new light in his eyes. It was admiration. "Rhea," he said into his comms, "get our media contacts ready." He looked back at me. "The ship will be crawling with Vicar and Onyx. It will be a hornet's nest." "I know," I said. "I'll go in on the bow team. I'll make the swap. I know my father's codes. I might need them to bypass their system." I looked him straight in the eye. "You and your team will be the shield. You run interference at the stern. You keep them busy. Rhea coordinates the authorities from the shore. Nikita runs the tech." I took a deep breath. It was my plan, my command. Cassian held my gaze for a long moment, then gave a single, decisive nod. "Agreed," he said. "Commander." The night of the storm was a living thing. It wasn't just rain and wind. It was a screaming, angry entity. and the long blue kestrel was a steel beast, groaning in protest as it was pulled from the relative safety of the pier. The ship's massive engines thrummed, a low vibration that I felt in my teeth, a counter-rhythm to the wind's shriek and the relentless, deafening drumbeat of rain on metal. I was leading. This was my plan, born of my father's breadcrumbs and Cassian's trust, dressed in black, non-reflective waterproof gear. I was the first one on the rope ladder. It was slick with harbor slime and diesel, and the rungs were cold enough to burn. My hands, already raw, ached with every pull. "Moving," I whispered into my mic, my voice stolen by the gale. "I'm below you." Cassian's voice came back, calm and steady. He was my anchor, a silent promise that I was not alone. May and Leo, the guard Silas had betrayed, followed him, their movements as dark and fluid as the water below. We crested the railing at the bow, the least guarded section of the ship. We landed on the wet deck in a low crouch. The deck was a chaotic landscape of stacked containers, massive winches and coiled ropes, all glistening dangerously under the ship's emergency lighting. Our target was the central bridge block, where the server was being prepped for its voyage. Cassian and his team would move to the stern, creating a diversion to draw the bulk of Onyx's guards. "Nikita, we're on deck," I murmured. "Give Cassian the go." "Roger?" Her voice crackled. "Go hot, boss!" We split. Cassian and his team vanished into the shadows of the containers. I moved low and fast, weaving through the machinery, the bait server Nikita's identical, hollow replica strapped securely to my back. I reached a vantage point behind a large ventilation housing. I had a clear view. There they were, midship, gathered in a pool of harsh, flickering light, were the architects of my father's ruin. Jasper Cade, a mountain of a man in a bright yellow slicker, was actually shaking hands with a man in a pristine, pressed white shirt, the vicar representative. He was thin, precise, and looked utterly out of place. Yet he radiated a cold, bureaucratic authority. Between them, bolted to a heavy-duty dolly, was the server rack, the ledger machine. They were gloating, their laughter snatched away by the wind. "Cassian, I have eyes on the target," I whispered. "Engage." From the stern, a series of soft fut-fut-fut sounds, not gunfire, canisters. Arcing through the rain, they landed and rolled, hissing out a dense, billowing fog. It wasn't gas, it was pressurized cold smoke, designed for disorientation, not harm. A wall of white obscurity instantly swallowed the back half of the ship. Shouts erupted from the Onyx crew. "What is that? We're blind!" I heard Cassian's voice in my ear, directed at his team. "Engaging stern guard. Remember the parameters. No civilian sailors. Keep them contained." Even in this, his code was absolute. This was my window. Cade and the vicar rep were distracted, yelling into radios, peering into the advancing fog. I broke cover, running in a low crouch, my soft-soled boots splashing through the puddles on the deck. I reached the server rack. It was unsecured, ready to be moved. "Nikita, I'm at the console," I panted, plugging a small USB drive into the ruggedized laptop that controlled the server. "Give me the PA." "You're Lieutenant Commander," she replied. My fingers flew. This wasn't a hack, it was a key. My father's filing system. Vicar 27, execute. The vicar rep's laptop screen went black, then it flashed, and my father's face appeared. It was the footage from the DV tape, grainy and stark. His voice, amplified by Nikita, boomed across the entire ship, cutting through the storm. To whoever is watching this, my father's voice declared, strong and clear, "You are in possession of evidence. You are an accessory to the murders of the Onyx Pier crew. You are an accessory to the murder of Hector Reyes." The effect was instantaneous. Cade spun, his face a mask of fury. "What is this? Shut it off!" The vicar rep recoiled, staring in horror at the ghost on his screen. The Onyx crewmen, caught between the fog and their dead victim's voice, hesitated, their loyalty faltering. This was the chaos I needed. I began unlatching the heavy server. my fingers fumbling with the cold metal clasps. The fight had started. I heard the dull thud of Cassian's team engaging the Onyx guards in the fog, metal on metal, shouts but no gunshots. Then I saw it, a movement at the edge of the fog, near the stern. It was Silas, the traitor. My blood ran cold. Cassian had brought him, cuffed, guarded by Leo. He must have intended to hand him directly to the NPW, a personal, undeniable piece of evidence. It was a risk, an honorable, foolish risk. I saw Silas talking urgently to Leo, who was clearly stressed, trying to watch the fight and his prisoner. Silas was gesturing, pleading. Leo leaned in. It happened in a heartbeat. Silas, the master manipulator, even in chains, exploded. He headbutted Leo, who staggered back. Silas didn't run. He lunged, a shard of metal, a shiv, a hidden blade materializing in his cuffed hands. He wasn't aiming for Leo. He was aiming for Cassian, who was fending off two Onyx thugs. His back turned to the betrayal. Cassian starboard! My voice was a raw scream that tore from my throat. Cassian reacted instantly, ducking and spinning just as Silas lunged, the blade, meant for his kidneys, sliced through the air, missing by an inch. Cassian dispatched his two attackers with brutal, non-lethal efficiency and turned to face his former friend. Silas, his face a mask of feral hatred, lunged again. "You never learn, Silas." Cassian's voice was cold as the ocean floor. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution of skill. Cassian moved inside the blade's arc, trapping Silas's arm, his other hand striking a pressure point, a sickening joint lock. Silas screamed, the blade clattering to the deck. Cassian slammed him against the bulkhead, spun him around, and used a fresh set of ties to secure his legs and retie his hands. "Rhea," Cassian said, his voice hard. "I have your package. He'll be waiting for the NPW." He left Silas, neutralized and humiliated, tied to a deck rail. He had faced the betrayal, and his code remained intact. He hadn't killed him. He had simply ended him. My hands were shaking, but the distraction had worked. I hauled the heavy, real server from its rack. I shoved the bait server into the empty space. It clicked, locking into place. As programmed, a small LED on its faceplate turned from red to a bright, confident green. Swap is done," I yelled into my mic. The vicar representative saw it. He saw me. He saw the green light. He didn't care about my father's ghost. He knew he'd been tricked. "White out!" he shrieked, raising his arm. It wasn't a signal. It was a command. Small canisters on his vest and on the server rack itself popped. A dense, chemical fog, thick and white, erupted, completely blinding me. It was worse than the smoke. It stung, burned my eyes, seared my lungs. I was blind. I couldn't breathe. A solid wall hit me from behind. Cassian. He had wrapped his body around me, his back to the chemical cloud, his face pressed into my hair, shielding me. "Don't breathe," he gasped, his voice muffled. "Hold on." The wind howled, but it wasn't dispersing the chemical. It was swirling it into a choking vortex. "I need to secure the server," I choked out, my eyes streaming tears of pain. I was still holding the real ledger machine. "Do it," he ordered. We were back to back, a single unit in the white chaos. He was my shield. I was his hands. I couldn't see. I worked by feel alone, my raw, numb fingers finding the magnetic clasps on the harness on my back, locking the heavy server in place. We moved as one, a practiced, perfect synergy born of trust. The chemical mist began to thin. My vision was a blurry, painful smear. A shape emerged from the white. Jasper Cade. He was coughing, his yellow slicker covered in white residue, but he was standing, and he was furious. Before I could react, his massive arm locked around my throat, yanking me from Cassian's protection and lifting me off my feet. My air was gone. The heavy server on my back made the chokehold even more brutal. "Veil," Cade roared, his voice a triumphant bellow. He pressed the cold, wet barrel of his revolver to my temple. "Drop your weapons, all of you, or I swear to God I'll paint this deck with her brains." I clawed at his arm. It was like iron. My training, it was useless against this brute strength. Cassian stood 10 feet away, his weapon raised. May and Leo flanked him, a perfect triangle of death. "Let her go, Cade," Cassian said, his voice utterly flat. "Drop the guns!" Cade snarled, pressing the barrel so hard it hurt my skull. I watched, horrified, as Cassian slowly, agonizingly lowered his arm. He placed his weapon on the wet deck. He gave a sharp nod. May and Leo did the same. Cade laughed, a short, ugly bark. "That's how it works. Vale, I always win." He gestured to the vicar rep, who was wiping the stinging residue from his face. "Get the server, the one with the green light." The man in the white shirt nodded, moving toward our trap. Cassian's eyes were locked on Cade, but I saw it. A tiny, almost imperceptible flick of his gaze. To the left, up, toward the central mast, where a small, waterproof camera was mounted. He was signaling. "Now, Cade," Cassian said, his voice deadly soft. "Tell your new friend in the white shirt to smile." Cade frowned, confused. "What?" "Nikita," Cassian said, his voice a command. "Pop it." A sharp pop, like a pressurized cannon, erupted from the bait server. It wasn't an explosion. It was a detonation of color. A massive, instantaneous cloud of brilliant, neon blue vapor burst from the server's vents. It hit the vicar representative full in the face, blasting him backward. It coated Jasper Cade's entire right side, his arm, his face, his gun. It painted the deck, the laptop, the bulkhead. Cade roared in shock, his eyes blinded by the dye, his grip on me loosening for a single, vital fraction of a second. Cassian didn't go for his gun. He launched himself forward in a low tackle, hitting Cade's knees like a linebacker. I went flying, skidding across the slick, blue-stained deck. The server on my back took the impact, saving me. The world was chaos. Blue dye, like something from a nightmare, was everywhere. Cade was screaming, trying to wipe the indelible ink from his eyes. And then I heard it, a new sound, cutting through the storm. Whoop, 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 whoop. Sirens on the water. Red and blue lights strobe-lit the deck, cutting through the rain. A new Avalon port watch cutter was speeding toward us, its massive searchlight locking onto the scene. "Rhea," Cassian's voice was grim in my ear. She didn't just call the NPW, she called the press. I saw it a second boat, a news chopper hovering low, its camera light a bright, probing eye. Their cameras were all aimed at the deck, at the man in the white shirt covered in bright blue dye, stumbling, at Jasper Cade, also blue, roaring in fury as Cassian pinned him to the deck. "Vale team, exfil now," Cassian yelled, cuffing Cade with his own ties. A thwack and a zip. May had fired a grappling line to the roof of the adjacent warehouse, a zip line. "Marin, go now." Cassian shoved me toward the line. "I'm right behind you." I clipped my harness onto the line, my heart pounding, the real ledger, the real evidence, secure on my back. I looked back one last time. Cassian was standing over the blue-stained, defeated forms of Cade and the vicar rep, the NPW boarding ladder slamming against the hull. He had won. We had won. I stepped off the edge of the Kestrel and flew through the wind and the rain, into the darkness of New Avalon. The week that followed the burning of Pier 9 was a blur of chaos and calculated silence. The story of the blue ink bust was a media firestorm. The viral video, shot by the news crew Rhea had summoned, was on every screen in the city. It was a perfect, indelible image. Jasper Cade and a mysterious man in a white shirt, both stained a vivid, cartoonish blue, being led away in cuffs while a pier burned behind them. The city was buzzing. Arclight Urban Works went into lockdown. The Port Development Committee issued a series of increasingly panicked denials. And then came the hearing. It wasn't a trial. It was, as Rhea had brilliantly arranged, a special public oversight hearing at Meridian Hall. convened by the newly formed and truly independent Bureau of Metropolitan Integrity. It was a body born from public outcry, designed for transparency. The hearing was being live-streamed, and the whole city was watching. The hall was a grand, cavernous space, all marble and dark wood, but the atmosphere was electric with tension. I sat at a long table at the front. With Rhea on one side of me, Nikita was somewhere unseen, a ghost in the machine. Cassian was nowhere to be seen. That was the plan. This was my stage. He would remain in the shadows, his name unmentioned, his presence a ghost, to keep me clean. Rhea began, her voice calm and precise, laying out the evidence with surgical precision. She presented the real server, my father's ledger, the mini DV tape, the story of Arclight, the Civic Research Fund, and the Onyx Harbor outfit unfolded, a meticulous map of corruption. The crowd murmured, a low, angry hum. Then it was my turn. I walked to the podium, the sea of faces, the cameras, the lights. It was terrifying. It was the Docklight Mart 100 times over. But this time, I wasn't alone. I clutched the letter my father had written, the paper soft and worn in my hand. I told them everything. I told them about my father, a good man trapped in a dark world. I told them about his fear and his courage. I didn't raise my voice. I just spoke the truth. My father left me a final piece of advice, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the vast hall. He told me that the most important choice is not what you stand for, but who you stand with. Choose the one who stands with you. Moran, he wrote, not the one who demands you stand by them. A profound silence fell over the room. I looked out at the faces, and I didn't see a mob anymore. I saw people. People who understood what it was like to be powerless, to be caught in a machine too big to fight. The next witness was Silas, Cassian's former friend, brought in under heavy guard. He was a reluctant star, but under the glare of the lights and the weight of the evidence, his story crumbled. He confirmed everything. He exposed Vicar for what it was not a government agency, but a private alliance of powerful men who believed they were above the law, a self-appointed cleanup crew who used murder and intimidation as their tools. The climax came unexpectedly. As I was walking back to my seat, a new sound cut through the tense silence of the hall, a high-pitched, angry buzzing, like a giant mechanical hornet. "Drone!" someone screamed. Panic erupted. A small, black drone, wickedly fast, shot through an open window high above the stage. It wasn't a camera drone. It had a small, sinister-looking package strapped beneath it. It dove, heading straight for me. I froze. A deer in the headlights, the crowd surged back. A dark shape launched itself from the side stage entrance. Cassian. He had been there all along, watching from the wings. His face was a mask of cold fury. He was moving to intercept, to put his body between me and the threat, to become my shield one last time. He wouldn't make it in time. "Gotcha, you little pest!" Nikita's voice crackled in the tiny, invisible earpiece I was still wearing. The drone, now 10 feet from my face, suddenly spasmed in midair. It wobbled, its rotors whining in protest. It tilted, spun out of control, and plunged, not into me, but sideways, into the grand marble fountain in the center of the hall's rotunda. It hit the water with a loud splash and a fizz of shorting electronics. From the back of the hall, a figure bolted for the doors. It was Jasper Cade, released on bail. He had come for one last, desperate act of revenge. He was still stained blue. The indelible dye clung to the side of his face and his hands, a mark of his public humiliation. He was a walking piece of evidence. He never made it. 2 NPW officers, alerted by Rhea, tackled him on the grand marble steps of the hall. The crowd, their fear turning to rage, surged forward, their shouts of justice echoing off the walls as the blue justice was finally and publicly served. The fallout was swift and total. Arclight's contracts were revoked, the Port Development Committee was dissolved, the Civic Research Fund collapsed overnight, and in their place, Using the seized assets, the city established the Hector Reyes Fund for Injured Workers, my proposal, a legacy of justice born from his sacrifice. It was over. We had won. I stood in the sudden, quiet aftermath, the crowd's cheers a distant roar. I looked toward the wings, where Cassian had been. He was still there, a shadow among shadows, preparing to do what he had always done, disappear. He was giving me my victory, clean and untainted by his world. He was letting me go. I thought of my father's letter. Choose the one who stands with you. I would not let my partner, my shield, the man who had taught me to fight, be relegated to the darkness. I walked off the stage. I walked past Ria's congratulatory smile, past the reporters shouting my name. I walked into the shadows of the wings, right up to him, and he looked surprised, a flicker of vulnerability in his dark eyes. I took his hand. His fingers curled around mine, a warm, solid presence. I turned and walked back out onto the stage, leading him with me, out of the shadows and into the full, bright glare of the lights and the cameras. A hush fell over the hall. The city held its breath. I turned to face the cameras, our joined hands a silent testament between us. When I was at my lowest, I said, my voice clear and strong, this man stepped out of the rain and shielded me. He said, "That's my woman, to stop the world from hurting me." I squeezed his hand. I looked up at him, and I saw a universe of emotion in his eyes, shock, relief, a profound, heart-stopping tenderness. "Today," I said, turning back to the crowd, to the city, to the world. "In front of everyone, it's my turn to say it. That's my man." The silence broke. The hall erupted in a roar of cheers and applause that shook the very foundations of the building. Cassian didn't smile, not a wide, public smile. He closed his eyes for a single, long moment. And I saw the weight of a lifetime, the shadows, the secrets, the burdens fall from his shoulders. He opened his eyes, looked down at me, and his voice was a low, solemn vow, meant only for me, but heard by the world. "I will protect you," he said, "without possessing you." The final loose end was a small, rusted public letter box in the Marrowlight Library, the one the vicar agent had told me to find, my father's real will. Inside, there wasn't money. There was a single, notarized, ironclad deed decades ago, before Arclight, before the darkness. My father, a young man with a passion for history and preservation, had used a small inheritance to anonymously purchase the then derelict chapel and gifted it to the city as a private library. He had left the library itself, his first love, to me. We turned it into the Hector Reyes Center for Civic Integrity, not a library of stories, but a public vault, an independent repository for evidence, a place where other whistleblowers, other trapped people, could leave their own keys and their own maps. Days later, the storm had finally passed, leaving New Avalon washed clean, the sky a bruised but hopeful purple. Cassian and I walked out of the center. Hand in hand, the rain had softened to a gentle, cleansing drizzle. He stopped me under a street lamp, its light haloing us in a soft, golden glow. He leaned in, and his kiss was slow, safe, and full of a quiet, powerful promise. It wasn't the frantic heat of the garage or the desperate anchor of the storm. It was the calm after. It was the beginning. The light reflected off the puddles on the street, shimmering like 1,000 tiny blessings. Thank you so much for listening to our story today. It means the world to us. Let us know in the comments where you're listening from. We'd love to connect and share our thoughts with you. If you enjoyed Marin and Cassian's journey, please subscribe to our channel, Mafia Boss Stories, and give this video a like. And if you really want to support us, hit that hype button to help this story reach more listeners just like you.